What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some highlights from the Summer Game Fest show on June 9th. Now, I do want to start this off by saying that the Summer Game Fest is not over. They will have some more stuff tomorrow that is pretty uninteresting to me, frankly. And then on June 12th, they have like the big PC showcase, which is what this channel will primarily be concerned with. So in a couple days, we'll likely have a separate video going over all the major news from that, which is going to be more relevant to this channel. However, today, they did like a big announcement showcase, more or less, and there are a few parts of it that I wanted to talk about. Now, we're not going to go over every single thing that they covered here. I will try to post like an article or something down below that talks about all of the announcements just for ease of use on your side. But I will say, just straight off the bat, generally speaking, I find these shows a bit disappointing, and that's not even necessarily the show's fault a lot of the time. More often than not, the games that I'm interested in just don't get talked about at these little showcases, if you will, outside of, the PC showcase. So combine that with the fact that a lot of these announcements, if you will, are basically like, here's a game we're working on, and they're pretty light on information, etc. The result is that I just don't find them super interesting. But nonetheless, there are a couple things that I wanted to talk about, as I said. So first and foremost, we have the announcement of Stormgate. Now, unfortunately, not a lot to go on here in terms of gameplay, etc. More of just an announcement. But the reason I'm curious about this is because this is a real-time strategy game from Frost Giant Studios, and if you're unaware of who that is basically many former Blizzard employees who worked on the previous RTS genre from that company, such as StarCraft and Warcraft, who, disappointed that Blizzard apparently just decided this genre didn't suit them anymore, stopped making them, and then these people essentially made Frost Giant Studios, and now they're working on their own RTS, which is what they want to work on. And as a result of that, I'm just very curious to see how Stormgate actually turns out. But the game itself aims to be a combination of sci-fi and fantasy, as well as an evolving story, which could mean just about anything, so I guess we'll see. But that said, the initial trailer, at least, and the visuals look interesting, and I'll be following this to see how it turns out. Which brings us to a similar situation with Marvel's Midnight Suns. I'll be honest, I'm not wild about Marvel in general. Nothing against it, it's just not my cup of tea in terms of fantasy nerdery, if you will. That said, Midnight Suns is actually a turn-based game from the team behind XCOM, which essentially means it's going to be a TRPG. And if you follow this channel at all, that's kind of my bread and butter along with CRPGs, which is primarily what sparks my interest in regards to this title. Now, they released a more cinematic trailer that showed off some of the Marvel superheroes that will be involved, and then they also released a longer combat video, if you will. And while I would say, for the most part, it looks pretty standard turn-based combat, they're implementing a card system, which in general, I'm not wild about. That's not to say it'll be bad exactly, but generally speaking, I don't like a lot of card game type systems in my RPGs where your character will draw cards that then function as their abilities. Personally, I don't like the RNG that incorporates into games. It's just not my personal style, but in general though, it can still be a fairly compelling way to make a game. So more than anything, I'm just curious to see if Midnight Suns can actually turn out to be a competent TRPG, which is something I have a lot of experience with, or if it will just basically be an average game trying to capitalize on Marvel's brand, which point blank are the type of game that we have seen before. I'll be watching it and we'll see what happens. Now, the other title I personally was kind of curious about with a few mixed feelings was Nightingale. And this is a shared world kind of survival game where you do the usual fight and craft stuff to try to survive, but it takes place in this sort of Victorian fantasy world, which is the part that I actually find intriguing, more the setting than anything else. I will say that I'm kind of mixed on this one. I think it could go either way. This is a genre that is a bit saturated. We've seen a lot of this type of game, and it's getting to a point where I don't know if the setting alone is enough to sell it or at least do well. However, this particular game does sort of incorporate another card system, ironically enough, that may or may not change some things. It's my understanding that these cards in this particular game will sort of influence the world that you to kind of wind up in. But again, I just don't know if any of that's going to be enough to really carry this game. And in general, while I don't necessarily cover a lot of these survival type games, I think the setting of this one is pretty cool, and I'd like to see what they do with it. Now, beyond that, I will say the rest of today's announcement weren't really my cup of tea, and I imagine that we'll have a lot more to talk about on June 12th once the PC showcase actually drops, which is supposed to involve Xbox and Bethesda, so hopefully we'll get news on things like Avowed, etc. that a lot of people have been waiting to hear about. But until then, that's what we've got so far, and I will hopefully see some of you guys back here for the PC showcase. But that's it for now. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.